All right, so I am now here with Steven Pynakker from Mormon Book Reviews. Thank you for being with me.
Oh, it's always a pleasure, dude. Love talking with you.
And if you don't know who Steven is, he's an evangelical, yet he has a lot of knowledge when it comes to the history of the church and also a lot of the beliefs. So I figured rather than talk to somebody from one of these splinter groups, I'll ask somebody who's kind of an outsider like me, but still is knowledgeable. So as I'm exploring independence, I'm seeing all of these churches all over the place. And then as I'm peering into the history, I'm realizing that there are splinter groups around independence, but it all sort of started internally, historically in the church. So when was it in the history of the Restoration, we'll call it, that individuals started to question Joseph and maybe claiming their own authority?
Yeah, that's great. So, David Whitmer was one of the three witnesses, to the plates. And so his name is written in the, Book of Mormon and everything like that as a witness. And he early on grew very skeptical of Joseph because he felt that Joseph wasn't on the up and up at times and felt that he actually was a fallen prophet. Now, did he feel that at the moment these things are happening, or did he look back in life? But he kind of points to the early days of the church that Joseph Smith fell. And so that's kind of serves as the impetus for a lot of these groups later on. And many of them actually will have different dates where they think the prophet fell. And others think that he never fell or that he just fell into error like shortly before the end of his life.
As far as people officially splintering away, did any of that happen prior to Nauvoo, or was that mainly after Joseph died?
Well, one of the biggest splinters happened is when Sidney Rigdon and Joseph Smith fled Kirtland after the collapse of the bank. There was a separate church that controlled everything there. And so they basically were claiming to be the church that Joseph fled from, and then Joseph goes to far west to kind of assert his authority over the second church out in Missouri. So you actually have an actual two churches at that time operating that were separate from each other.
And that would have been around, what,
after 1838, 1839, right around in there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then help me understand then, what are all of these splinter groups that I'm seeing here in Independence? And maybe just name a few of them, and if you could just sort of explain what some of the main distinctions are.
Okay, well, many of them, almost all of them, claim to be the true church that was founded on April 6, 1830, and that many claim, like the Temple Lot, which is right across the street, that they have an unbroken chain to the original church, and that they are indeed the heirs of the original church. You have the building we're by is the Community Christ Building, and this is what was called the RLDS, the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, founded by Joseph Smith's son, Joseph Smith III. And they believe that they're the true claimants to the Restoration. And that's why they say they were reorganized in 1860, but they were organized in April 6, 1860. And what happened was, where did all these sects come? Well, there's a lot of them here on this intersection, but there were also a lot back in the day after the martyrdom of Joseph Smith. So that's the schism there. We have the Strangites, and then you have all these other groups that are breaking off. And so
who are the Strangites?
That was James Strang founded a group. He claimed that he was the true heir, that he had a letter of appointment from Joseph Smith that claimed that he was to be his successor, even though he never was in Nauvoo or knew Joseph Smith directly, I don't believe. And so he makes this claim, and this is interesting because a huge amount of people actually join up with him, and he becomes a major rival to Brigham Young. And he actually builds a bit of an empire on Beaver Island in Lake Michigan, and it crowns himself king, gets elected to the state legislature, a state senator. So he actually was a legitimate rival to them. And then the other person that tried to start a church was Sidney Rigdon, who Brigham Young beat out. Sidney goes and attempts to start a church in western Pennsylvania, where he was originally from, and he fails, but then another church comes out of that called the Church of Jesus Christ, and they're often known as the Bickertonites, and they have their own separate history. So basically what happens, you do have all these schisms and groups that are and that happen after the 1844 martyrdom. But Joseph Smith III is able to coalesce most of those groups under the banner of the RLDS. And basically he says, okay, let's forget everything that happened in Nauvoo, essentially, and let's just go back to 1837 when we dedicated the temple in Kirtland. And that's going to be our starting point, where we can all agree theologically. So that's how he was able to bring all those groups together. Now, not all those groups joined up with Joseph Smith III, and so many of those groups are here present to this day.
one of the most fascinating things about this, two evangelicals talking here, right?
Yeah.
A lot of my LDS friends will kind of point to the fact that in Protestant Christianity, there are so many different denominations. And that's usually drawn back to where Joseph was whenever he was in the Sacred Grove. And he was like, I see all these denominations. Which one is the true church? And it's really interesting to me that within just a few years, there were factions starting to break off within a couple years after the church was established.
Yeah, very early on.
So what are the beliefs out there as far as like the future for all these different sects? Could they ever unite or reunite, or are they kind of staying separate?
That's the difference between us and the Restoration, is that they have the issue where there can only be one true priesthood. And so I got the priesthood, and in order for us to be unified, you would have to give up your priesthood to have the legitimate priesthood conferred upon you. So that's the big issue that you have there that's different than us, is we could have theological differences, but they're talking about issues of authority.
Sure.
And that's a big thing.
That makes sense.
And again, you go to Utah, and you'll find many different sects and breakoffs, including recently with Denver Snuffer. And so are there many other groups out there. In other words, this Restoration continues to also spawn off sects, just like Protestantism does.
Yeah. Well, and that's just it. That's probably the most interesting thing about this to me. I thought there were 2 or 3 different sects. Yeah. And then when I went into the Latter-day Saint Visitor Center, they handed me a piece of paper, and it showed all of these different groups that have broken off and have broken off from who broke off. And it's all very, very fascinating to me. And I wasn't expecting to see that when I showed up here. You need to check out Mormon Book Reviews with Steven Pynakker. He's a great friend. He's very good at what he does. Super entertaining, super informative. So you've been a big help to me, and I appreciate that. And you need to check out his channel. But I have more to say to you. So in the meantime, why don't we go in and check out the sanctuary?
Sounds great. Let's do it.
Let's go.
Awesome.